Hi, everyone. It's Professor Hull. So we are talking about the play Peter Pan today. We're going to get into, in this lecture, a little bit about theater during our time period, particularly looking at British theater because, as you may or may not know, JM Barrie was Scottish, but he was living in London through his adult life. So we're going to get into theater and the changes that were taking place, really exciting changes that led to sort of a proliferation of stage plays during the Victorian period. And then because we also, in the golden age of children's literature, cover not just Victorian times, but also the Edwardian period, which is when Peter Pan is actually first produced. We're going to look at some of the changes that took place during the Edwardian period as well, and we'll talk about those, and then we'll get into the author's life and a little bit about a background about the play. In the lecture after this, we'll look at the prologue, and which is very long. The dedication is quite long on this play. JM Barrie had a lot of thoughts. And we'll look at Acts 1 and 2, and then in our final lecture, we'll look at Acts 3 through 5. So that is our game plan. Let's get into it. A number of things took place technologically, socially, culturally, that led to this kind of growth of theater in the Victorian period. The first, and possibly most important, is that we have the introduction before the Victorian period, which starts in 1837. We have the introduction of gaslighting in theater. Not the narcissistic kind, although it is named after a movie called Gaslight that had to do with changing the gaslights and making them flicker and that kind of thing. But basically, this allows for brighter and more controllable illumination of the stage. And then we can have dramatic lighting effects and all of that kind of thing. Now, they were fire hazards, but by our point, in the golden age of children's literature, and certainly by the time this play was produced in 1904, the gaslights are starting to be replaced by electric lights in the 1880s and 1890s, and then into the early 1900s. So in addition to this, we have some developments of how stages are run. We have the introduction of directors, stage managers, more elaborate sets. A lot of times they would have kind of like a frame around them that allowed for more set design to be done. And so to me, that's really interesting because in looking at Peter Pan, you can't really have this play if you don't have some elaborate set pieces that are being brought in. And certainly the addition of stage managers allows for sets to be changed, allows for quick costume changes and having a director to oversee all of that. And you get into things like blocking and stuff like that that is done a little bit more elaborately during this time. We also have changes in transportation that allow people to go home a little bit later at night and still feel safe. So the omnibus, in another lecture I talked about the London Rail, the Underground Railroad in London, have allow then people to travel later at night, and so then theatrical productions can go later into the evening. In addition to all of that, we have Queen Victoria herself championing the theater, and then we also have a growing middle class and these people who looked for things to do with their time and have some entertainment. So not just London, but provincial areas as well had a great increase in the number of theaters, and the public were really demanding that more plays be put on. And we also have at that time some other types of entertainment have it kind of explode as circuses become another form of family entertainment, sometimes being performed in these spaces. And we also have this idea of musical theater that really has a great explosion during our Edwardian period, with Gilbert and Sullivan productions that delighted audiences. In addition to all of that, this is something that I think people in the United States might not have as big of a connection to as people who are British, but there's this also tradition of the British pantomime. And in the British pantomime, these were productions that are humorous and that contain a little bit of music as well. A lot of times these were, like Peter Pan, fairy tale stories. Sometimes to make them more complex and have them be a little bit longer, they have one or more fairy tales kind of put together in this sort of celebratory comedic presentation. Lots of times these are performed around Christmas time, which is traditionally when Peter Pan is performed as well. A lot of times it's at Christmas time. So some key elements to this that we see in our play are audience interaction. We boo Captain Hook, the villain of our piece. We cheer for Peter Pan, the hero of our piece. We clap for Tinkerbell, and there's a breaking of the fourth wall to clap for Tinkerbell at a certain point of the play. We also have in the pantomime a lot of times a person or sometimes two people dressed up as a horse. That would be sort of funny. In this play, we have a person dressed up as a dog in the form of Nana, right? The Newfoundland dog. So we also have in this tradition, Peter Pan, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but it was edited a number of times, and there were pantomimes of this play that included music and things like that from the very beginning. So I think that that's kind of interesting because the written version did not happen. JM Barrie did not put this play into print for people to read until 1928, long time after it was first produced in 1904, right? So basically the history of this is that we have the original play. Actually, also there's a precursor that we'll get into in a moment. There's a precursor kind of photographic book that has a lot of the same elements as the play, and that was done in 1901. Then in 1902, J.M. Barrie introduces the character of Peter Pan in his novel or set of little short stories, the Little White Bird, depending on how you kind of want to think of that. But it's a story that's being told within that book. And we'll talk about that when we get into the characterization. So we have this private sort of photographic book. Then in 1901, then we have The Little White Bird in 1902, the play Peter Pan, the Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up in 1904. Then in 1906, more chapters of Peter Pan are published as a separate book, Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. In 1911, we get the novel Peter and Wendy because people were calling for the play to be put into a readable form. J.M. Barrie basically kept editing it, and different editions of the play had different characteristics. So there's one where Peter in the play we're reading does not agree to stay with Wendy. He wants to never grow up at the end of the play. In some versions, he did stay with Wendy. In one version, they find a baby in Kensington Gardens under some leaves, and they kind of decide to adopt it. In another version, we have Hook climbing into the nursery at Kensington Gardens at the end of the play and then being chased by the crocodile. So the fantasy world kind of blends into the real world in that way. In other versions, Hook does meet his demise, and in some he does not, sort of indicating that there's a more perpetual war between him and Peter Pan in this place that is, by the way, called the Neverland. 3 separate words, not Neverland, one word, as a little point that I get annoyed about, that in the Neverland, we have no time, right? And so this is a continual clash of wills and kind of this cyclical thing that keeps happening. So essentially, we also then get a silent film version done by Paramount, a fairly big production for the time, in 1924. So what happens is that then Barrie writes down the play with all of this stuff in mind. And he has these, if you guys have seen this, I really, if you're not my class, please go and look at the actual text of the play. This play reads like no other play I've ever seen. The amount of stage directions is copious, and it is things that could never appear in a staged version, things that would never matter to people putting this on as a play. Notes that some of which come from the book version of 1911, so that we have background, so that if we're just reading this as a play and not staging it, we can see this. Different thoughts of the characters and some, background information and whatnot. It really just... I'm sorry I'm laughing, but it's really extensive. And I also think he has another, it's interesting to me. I believe that he may have had more adaptations in mind. There are a lot of notes there that, like I said, could not be done on the stage, could maybe be done in a film, right? And the notes kind of reflect, as does the prologue, this Boy Castaway's book from 1901. They reflect the novel. They reflect some of the pantomimes that have been done. They reflect some of the drafts that he did on onion skin that have been lost. And so it really is a very interesting compilation of all of these things. So let's talk about our very controversial author. JM Barrie is Sir J.M. Barrie. He lived from 1860 until 1937. So born a little bit before Alice in Wonderland, and then passing away just at the rumblings of World War II. So he was made a baronet in 1913. He was a member of Order of Merit in 1922. He was born and educated in Scotland, and to a Calvinist family, a conservative Calvinist family. His father was moderately successful as a weaver, so part of that growing middle class we talked about before, who would have been interested in the theater, right? Along with many other amusements. So one of the defining moments of his life seems to be that when he was 6, his older brother, David, who was their mother's favorite, died in an ice skating accident just before his 14th birthday. His mother is devastated. And it's not clear if James Barrie tried to take his brother's place or if this was on the part of his mother, but he did wear his brother's clothes, whistling in the same manner, trying to talk in the same manner. Some reports say that this was something he did to try to cheer his mother up. Other reports say that his mother basically dressed him this way. So to me, it's kind of not clear. But in any case, he was trying to take the place of his brother. For his mother's part, she found comfort in the fact that her son would basically remain a child forever and he would never grow up and never leave her. This is a thing that Barrie seems to struggle with himself throughout his life. And I think not unlike Lewis Carroll and Ruskin, we also talked about in one of my other lectures, the artist, we have a couple of figures during this time period who are really romanticizing childhood, not wanting to grow up, having difficulty with the adult world and navigating the adult world. And whether or not that's tied to sexuality, I don't know. A lot of people will claim that Barrie was... I don't want to get canceled from YouTube, and yet I hate to use euphemisms. So there were some allegations that Barrie abused the children under his care, the boys who were basically the inspiration for Peter Pan. It should be noted that Nico, the oldest, not the oldest of the boys, but the one who lived the longest, he lived until 1980, that he denied any impropriety. However, there are things in The Little White Bird, the book that has the original story of Peter Pan in it, about an older man sort of stealing a child away from its mother in terms of like grooming this child, and giving the child a bath, laying in the same bed with the child, those types of things. We also have a very strange letter written to Michael about being a birthday candle and being a candle with kind of a bent in the middle. I mention this only because I do think that this is an important point, that we have to face the realities of who these people were. This, I will say, on the other hand, we have Nico saying that nothing happened, and we do maybe want to listen to him and take his word for it. We also do have the young Peter himself, who tragically died on purpose. We also have Michael, who died possibly on purpose, with another young boy who is thought to have been his lover. So these are things that were happening around Barrie. And what we do know is that he met this woman, the Davies mother, and that he befriended Sylvia, was her name, and that he became an important part in the lives of her children. Arthur, the father, passed away in 1907. Sylvia passed away in 1910. Then we had George, John, Peter, Michael, and Nicholas, also known as Nico. So George passed away during the First World War, and the other two, as I said, obviously had some problems and some difficulties. We also know that Barrie had a wife with whom essentially he never consummated his relationship. She met someone else and insisted on divorcing from him. That was during the period of which he had met Sylvia and her boys. So when Sylvia passed away, she wrote that she wanted Mary Hodgson, the boys' nurse, to continue caring for them, and Jenny, who was Hodgson's sister, to come and help Mary. Barrie edited this document and put his own name in, substituting Jimmy for Jenny. So those are some things that we do know. There's no real evidence that he ever had inappropriate or sexual contact with them. And Nico said, quote, "I don't believe that Uncle Jim ever experienced what one might call a stirring in the undergrowth for anyone, man, woman, or child. He was an innocent, which is why he could write Peter Pan." So again, trying to sort of maintain propriety and maintain his uncle's good name. So moving beyond that, he wrote a number of works. Some were beloved and some were critically panned. One of his early works was Ibsen's Ghost, which was a parody of Henrik Ibsen's drama, and it basically caused a little bit of a stir at the time. There was also later a parody of Peter Pan that Barrie saw and apparently thoroughly enjoyed. There were other plays, The 12-Pound Look, which is a wife leaving her typical husband when she can gain independent income. We have Mary Rose, we have Dear Brutus. Those have a little bit of this idea of an ageless child in another world. And his final play was in 1936, really toward the end of his life. So he was a playwright throughout his entire career. And this was called The Boy David. which was basically a stage version of the biblical story of King Saul and young David. Interestingly enough, in that play, David was played by a woman because, again, sometimes it was difficult to have children be acting, and they cared a lot more about child stars back then than we do now. So yeah, like Peter Pan is very, very often played by a woman as well. So he moved mostly in literary circles. The novelist George Meredith was an early patron of his. He also had a lot of correspondence with another Scottish writer, Robert Louis Stevenson. They never met, but they did exchange letters quite a bit. We have also George Bernard Shaw was his neighbor for several years. H.G. Wells was one of his friends. So you can see how in these literary circles, a lot of similar ideas and similar themes. He was on an amateur cricket team as well, with other British authors. So I mentioned H.G. Wells, but Rudyard Kipling, Arthur Conan Doyle, P.G. Wodehouse, known for the Jeeves stories, A.A. Milne, known for Winnie the Pooh, right? All of these people, and also George Llewellyn Davies, the father of the Davies, one of the Davies brothers, and then also the son of Alfred Tennyson. So we have this person who has been part of this upwardly mobile middle class and has begun to move in literary circles and is a well-renowned playwright, and I think all of that is kind of interesting. So just really quickly to give a little bit of background information about Peter Pan himself. So the character of Peter Pan was invented to basically entertain George and Jack. Peter was the younger brother, and to amuse them, Barrie started talking about, like, what if little Peter could fly? Babies were birds before they were born. Parents used to put bars on nursery windows to keep the babies from flying away. And then we have this little baby who's 7 days old who flies from his nursery in Kensington Gardens. The original version of this is so odd, I think, because really Peter in his original version is this baby that can't fly at first because he's no longer still a bird, and uses a boat to navigate a large lake that divides Kensington Gardens from Hyde Park. He befriends fairies. He amuses them with his human ways. He agrees to play the pan pipes. We'll talk about the myth in a moment. And he's at these fairy dances, and eventually the fairy queen mob grants him the wish of his heart, which is to return home to his mother. The fairies help him to fly home, and he finds his mother asleep in his old bedroom, and he's guilty for leaving her because she must miss him terribly. And then he realizes that she has given birth to another boy that she can love. And heartbroken, he basically returns to the fairies. He later meets a little girl, Mamie, who's lost in the gardens, kind of like a little precursor to Wendy. She makes little presents and letters for him. She gives him an imaginary goat, again, hinting at the original myth, which he rides every night. And when Peter is not playing, he likes to make graves for the children who got lost at night, burying them with little headstones in the gardens. It's dark. Mamie basically decides to return home to her mother because she misses her mom. So yeah, we have a very odd origin story here. And there are some, to me, a little bit humorous, at least interesting videos here on YouTube about how Peter Pan is evil. I think that is basically because we are taking the name, the Pan part of the name at least, from this ancient Greek god of the wild. So shepherds, flocks, rustic music. A lot of times he is depicted as half man, half goat. His home would have been in Arcadia, the mountainous region of Greece. But worshipped in natural settings like caves and groves instead of temples, really closely associated with fertility, nature, impromptu music, often playing the pan flute you might have seen with the little, the flutes that are all in a row, from small to large. And his name is sometimes linked to the word panic because he was believed to cause sudden fears in travelers who disturbed his rest. In Roman mythology, identified with Faunus, another nature deity, and this kind of became a significant figure in some romantic literature, some neo-pagan movements symbolizing untamed nature and freedom, also sometimes symbolizing licentiousness, although I think that people conflate Pan with Bacchus, not the same, a different Greek god there, where we're looking at wine and all of that, all that comes with it, right? The Bacchanalian orgies and things of that nature. But I think, interestingly enough, when we get into the play, we'll talk about how Peter is described in the very copious notes from Barrie. But we also have this idea of fairies, and fairies became more popular in Victorian England. Some people think as a reaction against the industrialization that I talked about in one of my previous lectures, that some of the changes that took place culturally and socially and historically in Victorian times and into Edwardian times that are really sort of setting the stage for World War I. So people start to have this longing for folk stories and the pastoral, this enchantment with rural areas, tales of the past. We have, we've talked about theater. Midsummer Night's Dream and The Tempest are Shakespearean plays that feature fairies, and they were performed often, became very popular during Victorian times. Victorians also known for their extravagant wallpapers, and fairy paintings, fairy wallpapers were very popular in children's rooms. We also have the idea of the Neverland in Irish lore and Celtic mythology, which as a Scotsman, JM Barrie would have been very familiar with. We have the Isle of the Blessed, which is also the land of the young, sometimes also known as the land of the dead. This is a place for perpetual youth and spring. So we have this idea of fairy folks and elves that would sort of spirit children away. The idea of the changeling that kind of comes back into fashion a little bit. An older story than this, an older concept, but resurging, right, during this period. And so perhaps Peter Pan belongs to the world of the dead or the land of the dead. This is the Neverland. And perhaps Hook does as well. If Peter is perpetually a child, is Hook perpetually, like a 40 to 50-year-old man? We have, I think, then this really interesting mixture of fairy stories and fantasy and a little bit of mythology, and then a lot of play, which we will talk about as we get into the stage play itself. How play is used, how the Boy Castaway's pictorial book that Barrie made was an inspiration for a lot of the elements, especially in Acts 1 and 2, and all of that. But I do think that the questions I'd like you to ask yourself: why does this play endure today? And, you know, Barrie wrote a number of works. So why is it this one that we still know? And why is it this one that got made into a Disney movie? Why is it this one that is performed every Christmas in pantomimes and stage shows? Why has it been adapted so many times as a silent film, as a cartoon, as a series, as, you know, various live action remakes, including like Robin Williams' Hook, that sort of focuses on like if Peter Pan grew up and then had to go back to Neverland, what would that look like, right? All of those. Why is this such an enduring character? Think about that, and in the next video we will talk about the prologue and the first couple acts of the play. Thanks, everyone.